Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me today. Things are still crazy topsy-turvy over here at the Lusk household, and let me tell you, it's been pretty nutty lately. So right now, I'm sitting on a porch with the flag behind me and waiting for the church bells to go off. They're about a minute or so late for the 2 o'clock chime, and just as soon as those go off, I'll be able to pick up with whatever's going on in the war in Ukraine. You'll probably hear it because I don't have a whole lot. There it is. They sometimes also play a song immediately after, so bear with me as we get through this. No song? Nope, there it goes. Yes, that actually goes off pretty much every hour during the daylight hours and into the evening. It's one of the interesting parts of being right across the street from a church with a church bell. And normally in my own office, instead of outside on a porch, it's quiet enough that I can easily filter it out for you guys to just continue talking. You can hear it as a few little bells in the background, but it's a lot more pronounced when I'm outside right across the street. So let's go ahead and get started on what's going on in the Ukraine war. Thank you again for joining me today, and I hope that you are ready for just a relatively short video today. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now we'll start off with one that is just kind of pretty silly here as far as I'm concerned. Medvedev has proposed his peace plan, and he is marketing it on any of the relevant places he can put it. You will find these points to be rather fascinating, I think. And I think Dimitri from War Translated puts it best. When he translated it over here, let's see what that looks like on the screen. That should. Okay, come on, show the next step there. Yeah, that'll work just fine. Here are the 7 points of his peace plan. Recognition by the former, after that called F, Ukraine. In other words, the former Ukraine. All throughout, it's all assuming there will be no Ukraine when everything is done. Acknowledgement of the defeat in the military component of the conflict. Complete and unconditional surrender of Ukraine, represented by the neo-Nazi clique in Kiev. Demilitarization of the former Ukraine and the ban on the creation of paramilitary forces on its territories in the future. Number 2, recognition of the Nazi character of the international community of the former Kiev regime and the forced denazification of government bodies of former Ukraine under UN control. 3, a UN statement of loss of former Ukraine of international legal entity and the impossibility of any of its legal successors joining military alliances without the consent of Russia. 4, resignation of all constitutional authorities of former Ukraine and the immediate holding of elections to the provisional parliament of the self-governing territory of former Ukraine. Number 5, adoption by the provisional parliament of laws on the payment of all required compensation to Russia including payments to the relatives of the dead citizens of our country, and payments for harm to the health of the wounded, establishing a procedure for compensation for property damage caused by constituent entities of the Russian Federation. Number 6, official recognition by the interim parliament of former Ukraine that its entire territory is the territory of the Russian Federation. Adoption of an act of reunification of territories by Ukraine with Russia. And 7, self-dissolution of the provisional parliament. UN recognition of the act of reunification. So for those who keep claiming that Russia doesn't want Ukraine, that they just want to get their tasks taken care of, the denazification of Ukraine, etc., like that, this is their peace plan. Ukraine's peace plan is much simpler. Get all the Russians out and pay us back for all the damages you did. Pretty straightforward. This one is basically give up your whole country. You will have no independent nation. There will be no Ukraine. You'll be reunified with Russia. You'll be under the Russian boot. And by the way, you still have to pay us for it. So that is what Dmitry Medvedev has proposed as his peace plan for Ukraine. The total and complete surrender of the nation. As Anton Hershchenko states, it is obvious that Russia is not going to negotiate. This is their peace formula. That is what Russia has been intending all along. Any claims for anything less disregards all of the rhetoric that was done inside of Russia before this invasion, during the initial stages of the invasion, and anything like it. So anybody who is claiming otherwise, you just have to look at what Russia says. And if you look at what Russia says, what Russia's mouthpieces say, what Russia's propagandists say, they are looking far beyond Ukraine as well. They want to reunite the old band. They want to put the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics back together. And that's where they're going. So let's go ahead and move on to news out of Ukraine, since we've got a kind of a short one today. I think it'll be going pretty quick. From President Zelensky, he states, winning here in Ukraine in this confrontation with Russian terror is a matter of survival for democratic systems, if democracies are worth anything at all. When we defend ourselves, we can ensure that no other international criminal is tempted to launch an aggression like Putin. We can and must protect life. And again, just as a reminder, and I know pretty much everybody who watches this is already going to understand, having paid attention, done their own research on these types of things, that this is the long story short. If Ukraine falls, it basically is an entire condemnation of the entire Western world. Bar none. It shows that Western powers are unable to face and confront a true threat on the level of even Russia, which shouldn't be a threat. Their only real threat is nuclear weapons, and that's because they still have them. China was looking at what's going on and saying, you know what? Looks like the United States and the Western world isn't going to support Taiwan either, because they certainly didn't support Ukraine. Iran's already working this over in Israel and the Middle East, working on trying to disrupt global trade and cause chaos and uncertainty throughout. And the thing is that in order to stop a bully, you got to face him down. Okay, that's probably enough editorializing for today. Let's go ahead and get into the rest of this. We started the process of rotation and replacement of units and subunits that have been performing combat missions at the front line for a long time. This will stabilize the situation and have a positive impact on the morale and psychological state of our soldiers. From Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi. This is one of the big challenges that they've been facing lately, is that they want their soldiers, even though they need those soldiers in the field, those soldiers need some time not in the field. They need to be away. And not just for a rest and recuperation, but they need replacements. And allow some of these soldiers who have been fighting since 2014, 2022, to get back to their families and return to their lives. So that's the situation on the front lines as far as the rotation of troops is going. Let's go ahead and move on to news out of Russia, and we've got a few things here. The Defense Intelligence update from the UK states, according to local officials voting on the 15th through 17th March 2024 Russian presidential elections has started early across the temporarily Russian-controlled territories of Ukraine. Efforts by Russian officials to get the population to vote are intensifying. In Luhansk, 2,600 officials have been drafted in to visit homes and persuade residents to vote. Heads of educational and other government establishments have been told to ensure their subordinates turn out to vote. With no independent election observers and voter lists in at least one town absent, the potential for falsification of results is increased. With significant population displacement and migration from these areas due to the ongoing conflict, it is likely that only approximately a third of the pre-war population remains. Whilst Russia has no legitimate basis to hold elections on the territory of Ukraine, the credibility of the elections is undermined further by a lack of proper representation, poor security, and coercive measures to pressure the population to vote. It is highly likely the occupation authorities in these territories will claim a high turnout with overwhelming support for Putin, irrespective of what actually happens, to give the impression that a democratic choice has been made. And I'm going to, I've got something in here I want to share with you if I can find it real fast. I had my computer rebooted shortly before this, so I'm going to have to kind of quickly scan through to find this. But while I'm looking for this, I can share with you a video I saw, not the video itself, but from back in 2022, middle of 2022, as I recall. It was showing actually some of the referendum from, I believe it was Luhansk or Donetsk, and they were counting the votes, and the lady was literally picking up blank pieces of paper, not looking at them, and declaring that it was for annexation to Russia. And she'd put that one down. She'd pick up the next paper, and it would say it was for annexation to Russia, for annexation to Russia, for annexation to Russia. And yet the papers you could see were blank, unmarked, or even marked no to the question. So it didn't matter what you voted. They were just doing the performance of everybody says they want to be part of of Russia now. It was performance at the best thing you could say. Here it is, in fact. You can see this, kind of hard for me to see here, but you might actually have a better view. This is a soldier who showed up at a house, masked with a gun, to encourage someone to vote. Could you imagine if we did that here in the United States? Had armed soldiers show up to your house and insist that you fill out your ballot in front of them, no privacy, and then you get to stick it into a box that's clear. This is no way to run free and fair elections. Forcing people to vote the way you want at the end of a gun barrel is definitely not going to put you in a position of having legitimate elections. And this is what's going on in the occupied areas of Ukraine right now. Moving on, a Russian oil refinery. We already mentioned 3 of them being attacked. Some of these have now shut down partially after these attacks, no longer able to perform at even close to their capacity anymore. So, for instance, this case, they were talking about the Novoshakinsk oil refinery in Rostov that managed to get hit during one of those drone attacks. The vice president of Lukoil, Robertus, committed suicide in his office. He died of asphyxia. He was found hanging in his office. And it seems like there's been 5 of these happening to Lukoil executives recently. So what exactly, let's just say, I wonder how voluntary these are. From Anton Herischenko, gasoline prices have risen to a 6-month high due to the drone attacks on oil depots. The exchange price, it talks about the exchange price for a bit going up, indicating that the price has really risen significantly, especially compared to the average salary of a Russian family. And these fuel prices rising, of course, we've just had this attack, which means that the supply chain has not actually been interrupted just yet. There's already oil and fuel supplies going to the various fueling stations across. What they're seeing, on the other hand, is that the potential for supply is being cut off. Sorry, there's going to be that interruption every quarter hour, so we'll try and kind of move this along pretty quick here. Anyway, so even though the supply in the actual field has not been disrupted by this attack, it was already short. Russia had already put an embargo on exporting their oil products because they were already short on refining capacity from previous attacks. This latest one is now causing ripple effects, and which will really start showing its effect probably in the next week or so. This is, let me see if I've got to get this right. This is the roof of the Russian Defense Ministry in Moscow. And it's kind of hard to see here, so bear with me. But on his back is a pump action shotgun. They've got a Panzer self air defense system, an anti-aircraft system there that is ready to shoot down drones and things like that. But the last line of defense for the system itself is a soldier with a shotgun who likely has some skeet shooting experience. Interesting to see what measures they're going to now for that last possible moment. And the question I always am going to have is, that soldier's so close to that system. If the drone gets through, it's going to make sure that soldier no longer exists anymore. Is he really going to stand between that system and an incoming drone? Just an interesting thought. There was a missile strike on a Russian military training ground in Trozbinka in occupied Luhansk. At least 10 Russians were taken out in that. This is talking about, okay, it's the translate's not working right here, but I remember enough about this I can talk about it for a moment or two. Most of the refining capacity in Russia is within 1,000 kilometers of Ukraine. It's nearly all on the western side of the country, well within that range, because the idea was to make it so they could easily export oil and oil products across over into Europe. So with all this refinery capacity so close to to Europeans over there, it also puts it pretty vulnerable to these long-range drones that Ukraine has now. Um, Interesting to see, and it just indicates that there's a lot of ripe targets available for Ukraine to hit. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you on board. I am having to kind of just watch for comments every once in a while, so thank you for joining me. Okay, so this is talking about those oil refineries some more here. Again, they're mostly in the western part of the country. There are some farther east, but look at how many are focused right there within easy access to Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine also has a pipeline through there that the Russians have been using to export gas and gas products. So for the West, according to Fred Hoffman, the Cold War ended in 1991. For Vladimir Putin, however, the Cold War never ended. It simply transitioned to a new phase. And this is something I think we continuously forget in Europe and in the United States, at least from my experience, from what I'm seeing talking to various people. And that is that Russia never stopped being at war with the West, with the United States in particular, but the West as a whole. There was there was brief moments, and now understand there were some people that it looked like they were coming around. They wanted to be part of a Western world. Some of the leaders so shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union. But for Vladimir Putin himself, who has been president for how many years now? 20 some? The Cold War never ended. He never transitioned to the idea of a peaceful future. So, and that's been shown by the constant invasions that Russia has been doing in various countries through the years. Various former Soviet countries, that is. Let's go ahead and move over to the international front. The European Union is proposing to increase restrictions on Russian and Belarusian grain imports. They're hoping to do this to kind of quell some of the farmer protests overall. But again, it seems like those protests may be ginned up by Russian influences anyway. And there's a lot of hinky things going on with that right now over in Poland. Things to be concerned about that we're keeping an eye on. And so we're watching that closely. Austria kicked out 2 Russian diplomats who have been doing actions that are incompatible with their diplomatic status. Obviously, they've been acting as spies in various ways, spies and agitators. And the Austrians are having no truck with that, so they kicked them out. Ukraine's justice minister has stated that Ukraine is willing to accept loans if necessary to secure U.S. aid. This is acknowledging a Republican plan to put in place loans instead of outright giving aid to Ukraine. This is at least it shows their willingness to do so. The thing is that the terms that they're using for those loans are very favorable to Ukraine, including zero interest and no payment plan to pay it back. So it's effectively still the exact same thing. They just tacked loan to the actual numbers. Interesting to watch, but it's a creative way to do it. We did the same thing with Britain in World War II, and it took them a long time to pay that back. So a lot of that's just carrying on previous ways of carrying out the assistance to other countries. The European Investment Bank is talking about investing in the EU defense sector, and the EU really needs to really get their act together on the whole defense industry over there, especially as it looks like the U.S. is not being a reliable partner at the moments that they're needed the most. So the Europeans are going to really need to ramp up their production and start investing heavily. In fact, there's even talks that I saw somewhere recently, and I don't think I have it here, but there's been talks about increasing the NATO requirements for defense spending for each nation to 3% instead of 2%. Poland's already at 4%. So they need to take it more seriously. And if all of them can get into those levels, Europe will become Fortress Europe. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the U.S. Department of Defense is now willing to transfer the longer range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine. They report that they have alternatives with the precision strike missile, which they believe is ready for deployment in the U.S., and therefore their stockpiles of ATACMS missiles can now be made available to Ukraine in the longer range variants. Jens Stoltenberg declared, "It will be a serious historical mistake to let Putin prevail. The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. They need our help now." So this is he's talking about the severity of allowing an authoritarian regime to overtake Europe in general. This is, and I hate to say it this way, but this is right out of World War II. We're seeing the signs of it right there. The same types of problems are being created, where the thirst for power and authoritarianism is overcoming the more people-oriented regimes or people-oriented governments of the West. The European Union has approved an additional 5 billion euros in funding aid through the European Peace Formula, or Peace Fund, that's it. This is allowing them to send more arms, munitions, and other equipment to Ukraine. And this is an interesting little piece right here. Ukraine apparently is getting South Korean 155 millimeter ammunition. but not directly. South Korea is not sending the shells directly to Ukraine. Instead, they're being shipped to the McAllister Army Ammunition Plant in Oklahoma, where they refurbish it, give it a new fuse, paint it with proper markings in U.S. style, and ship it over to Ukraine from there. It's just an interesting way of shifting some of those supplies around so that Ukraine can make use of that ammunition. And if this ammunition has been sitting in storage for a while, that means that what South Korea is going to end up with is new ammunition that are newly produced, and their old stock can be rotated out and used actually for its main purpose. This little piece was interesting, and I don't know if I can give it the justice it requires. Around Kaliningrad, this is the Soviet pocket of over in Europe proper that is cut off from the, sorry, not Soviet, Russian pocket right here. There's two rivet joint aircraft, one S-100B Korpin for signals intelligence, one S-100D Argus for advanced airborne warning and control, a tanker, and an unknown number of fighters all surrounding Kaliningrad right now. That is really there in the middle of NATO proper at that point. And the thing is that I don't know why they're doing it. It's interesting to keep an eye on. Of course, there's plenty of reasons to do so that I can think of just off the top of my head, but I don't have any official information on why this is happening right now today. Now, there is the exercises going on over there, which might be part of that, the NATO exercises. But either way, it looks like they're keeping a really close eye on Kaliningrad. And now we can move on to the front lines. By the way, I'm going to pause right here for just a moment. If you are just logging in, absolutely chime in. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I do appreciate them very much. Got a lot that's been going on lately. This is probably going to be one of the shorter days as far as this goes, just because my stream yesterday was comprehensive of almost 2 days worth of information. So we're working at just the last 24 hours, and so we're kind of back to normal right now. So thank you again for logging in and letting me know you're here. Let's go ahead and continue on with the front lines. All right, before I go any further, let's see if they have updated today, because it's about this time of day, maybe in the next hour or so, they typically update. Now, some of this information looks to be from the last 2 days ago, maybe, because it's indications of things that have changed that from my other reports, I think may have been previously. But here's the situation in Novomihalaivka. This was the yesterday lines, which I believe, again, was from about 4 days ago. And then the Russians captured a lot of open territory outside of Novomihalaivka. So keep that in mind right there. Orlivka. Again, this is just a teeny tiny change here. And as I recall, that's just south of Orlivka. Where is it? All right, they've been active in this area. Yeah, it's just outside of Avdiivka. It's a tiny change, concerning, but not the big changes that the Russians were pulling off in the previous, basically 2 weeks. Pervomaysk. Again, another capture of open territory right up to this water feature right here. And Pervomaysk is not a large location, so I don't necessarily know that the Ukrainians are going to put up a big defense there. And just outside of Terney, which this area keeps kind of getting active and then cooling off with no major changes between. I mean, look at this. The Russians even sacrificed some territory to come up to this point here. So a little bit of a give and take on this, maybe almost not a change in the amount of territory. Terney is well north of Bakhmut right here, kind of near the forestry area that we occasionally talk about. And every once in a while, whenever the Russians think they've got the advantage, they all of a sudden start advancing here. and then within a day or two, they're beaten back again and stopped. We'll watch this one to see if that carries that still carries through. Moving over to the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian shortages of ammunition and other war materiel resulting from delays in the provision of U.S. military assistance may be making the current Ukrainian front line more fragile than the relatively slow Russian advances in various sectors would indicate. Ukrainian prioritization of the sectors most threatened by intensive Russian offensive operations. Ukrainian prioritization of the sectors most threatened by intensive Russian offensive operations could create vulnerabilities elsewhere that Russian forces may be able to exploit to make sudden and surprising advances if Ukrainian supplies continue to dwindle. Russia's retention of the theater wide initiative increases the risks of such developments by letting the Russian military command choose to increase or decrease operations anywhere along the line almost at will. Basically, the Russians currently have the advantage with the Ukrainians on defense because the Ukrainians will not be nearly as flexible or able to put up an offensive, for instance, if the Russians pull some troops from one area and send them to another to really put some pressure on. That's what they're talking about here, is that right now, Ukraine may be pretty darn vulnerable. Something to keep in mind. Then there's the big bit of news out of the last couple of days here, and that is the actions by the Russian Freedom Legions and the Russian manned units that have been going into the Belgorod and Kursk regions. Still more operations ongoing as of the last information I have available, to the point where Russians are starting to flee on foot because they are not being allowed to flee in their vehicles or with their stuff. It says, there just do not panic, the authorities advised, as they block citizens from leaving. So they're basically running away on foot out of areas of Belgorod. The Legion of Free Russia made an announcement basically. All residents of the Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions of Russia who do not have time to evacuate immediately proceed to bomb shelters. Now, this is from, earlier today, and the report was that within a few minutes of this announcement, the air raid warnings started going off in Belgorod itself. So it looks like these legions are doing some pretty effective military operations in likely near guerrilla fashion, with some hit and maybe even capture territory for a bit until they start getting real pressure and then pulling back. I'm sure there's a military guy who will tell me exactly what that is, what the name for that is. But either way, they are causing havoc over in Russia. More of Belgorod, Russia, is in flames as the Ukrainian army continues to liberate the Belgorod People's Republic. This is, he said, journalist Jason J. Smart states that this is not a civilian object burning, according to the news reports in the area. So it's something military related that is burning in Belgorod. There is reports that up to 5 settlements are now have active fighting within them. This was as of last night. That would be in, Oleksiy Baranovsky. Oh, no, never mind. That's the name of a fighter there. They don't say which 5 it is. Though, again, these are ones that are close to the Ukraine border. So keep that in mind there. The Russians are reported to have destroyed a bridge over in Sumy Oblast that's right near the Russia-Ukraine border. This is over the Vorskla River, and the reports are they're trying to limit these ongoing incursions by destroying this bridge. The fact that this bridge was still in existence indicates that the Russians thought they'd be able to use it sometime in the future. Otherwise, they would have destroyed it long ago. The Russian Volunteer Corps Chief of Staff, Alexander, known as Fortuna, has disclosed that their unit has penetrated several dozen kilometers into Russian territory and has captured prisoners. He said that the operation was planned for months, which doesn't surprise me. While declining to specify the number of prisoners, Alexander mentioned that they were handed over to Ukraine for exchange purposes. He announced more upcoming raids on Russian territory. Now, note that he called it raids. They are unlikely to actually hold territory inside of Russia itself for significant lengths of time. They are going to raid in there, cause a whole lot of havoc, capture some equipment and some soldiers, and then when the pressure gets really starting to turn up, assuming that Russia can, they'll pull back out and raid somewhere else, and trying to pin down Russian forces far away from the front lines in Ukraine. The governor of Belgorod has closed all shopping centers in the city of Belgorod in light of the ongoing special military operation of the Russian Democratic Forces, meaning these Russian partisans. And he's encouraging people to avoid non-essential travel. These are measures being taken by a place that knows it's in the middle of a war all of a sudden. They're figuring out that they are actually going to be part of this special military operation, whether they want to or not. And that's the situation on the front lines. We're going to go into the extras in just a moment here. But before I do, I am trying to slow down just a little bit, speak at a more measured pace, because I know that sometimes I can get, when I'm really moving, I can really get to move to speaking really fast. Let me know if it's made any difference for you at all, or if you want me to go back to speaking a little bit quicker. I can see both being advantageous because I mean, obviously, I can do both. It's just more a question of what helps you to understand the information more easily. Let's go ahead and go into the extras now. One of the things that I'm going to touch on this briefly here. One of the things we're seeing with the whole situation with these Russian partisan groups that are going across the Ukraine-Russia border and invading and assaulting into Russia itself. One of the things we're seeing is that the Ukrainians are using Russia's tactics against them. The thing is that this is what Russia's been doing all along. And this article from the Insider talks about how Russia creates African revolts in order to really cement their influence. They want to set up warlords and people that are favorable to the Russians. And by doing so, they have to create a lot of discontent and revolts in order to create the situations that creates the warlords that can be manipulated by Russia. And this is kind of an interesting overall process that Russia's been using for a long time in various places across the world. We're starting to have that kind of spelled out for those of us who may not have been paying close attention to what activities Russia's been doing in their extracurricular time. This from the defense of Ukraine, I thought was beautiful. This man is painting a picture about war. And look at the tremendous amount of talent that he has. Such amounts of detail with a brush. I wish I had that kind of talent. However, I don't wish enough to spend the years necessary to develop that level of talent because I've got other talents I'm working on. That said, whenever I see somebody with this level of amazing talent, I am impressed. And we'll end off with a couple of cat-related items. Here are some Ukrainian repair depot cats in service with the 148th Artillery Brigade. And make no mistake that if you ever want somebody to inspect your work and tell you everything that's wrong with it, cats are the perfect animals to do so. Because if there's one thing I know, a cat has absolutely no qualms about punishing you for anything you do wrong. And we'll end off with this cat for the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Sitting atop the barrel blast deflector there, the muzzle brake of a Ukrainian piece of military hardware. Just proud of where he's perched, watching over the crew as they work, I'm sure. Just thought it was a beautiful picture to end off with. And on that note, I'm going to take a quick look to see if there's any comments. None today, but thank you for joining me today. I do realize that my streams have been at unusual times as things have gotten kind of crazy around here. Hopefully they'll settle back down within about a week and we'll be on a more normal schedule again. But understand that I do appreciate you, and I do want you to know that that I look forward to our chats each time and hope to see even more of your participation in future videos. Give me with that thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. Subscribe if you are new here. And on all that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on the next live stream.